Okay. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Look, thanks for hanging around. As I said, I think it's really important to help integrate some of the thoughts and the experiences and also the energies that the film Eye Awakenings invokes in you, the audience. I have been touring this film around North America. We've toured in Australia and in the UK as well. And it's always a beautiful opportunity to meet the community of people who are interested in these ideas and this frequency of being and exploring these dimensions. And it's also wonderful to have local guests on the panel discussions that we have after the movie and to invoke some of their wisdom and their knowledge and apply it to these situations. So I'm just going to pass this down the row here and then get these people to introduce themselves, starting with Mr. Willy Lloyd.
Good evening. Lived here in Portland for a long time. I've had extensive background with psychedelics going back 47 some years. And I was very excited about this film and watching the project with the book and everything come out. It's great to have RAC here finally, and I want to welcome you. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Gayle Hifi, and I first drank ayahuasca in 2000 in an Indian village in Ecuador and ended up spending several years with the shaman's family there. And now and for the last about 12 years, I've been one of the moderators in the ayahuasca forums, ayahuasca.com, which has given me like a front row seat to a lot of people's experiences, preparations, and integration processes post-ayahuasca too. And so I can kind of say that from the time that I first drank it, it's really like reordered my life around it. And I also remember the Santo Daime Church, which is a church that drinks ayahuasca as a sacrament. So, and I've drunk it on my own as well as in the jungle. So I've had various different ways of experiencing different points of view here.
Hi, my name's Charles Shaw. I'm an author and filmmaker, and I moved to Portland in October, so I'm the new guy on the block. I have about a 10-year history with psychedelic medicine. I found it at age 35 when I was looking for healing therapy for severe trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder. And in that time, since I found this medicine, I took a little detour into the counterculture. I spent about 7 years in the Burning Man community, creating theme camps and producing festivals and advocating for harm reduction. And so I also was responsible for the MAPS Research Clinic on the Playa, which is known as the Zendo Project. And that's the only place in America right now we know where psychedelic harm reduction research is going on a yearly basis. I've written extensively about ayahuasca and about psychedelic medicine. It's something that I care about very much. And right now I'm mostly focused on what we're calling the standards and practices and also the ethical concerns of what's going on in the ayahuasca community.
It's going to be a talking stick evening here. Yeah. Look, that's really interesting. I guess the commonality that I see between all us as participants up here on stage is that we all represent different facets of these subcultures, but they're cultures involved with medicines and with altered states and with exploring these potentials that lie within and without. There's been that whole psychedelic wave since, well, even before the 60s, you know, there was the beatniks, and then psychedelic experience or altered states goes all the way back through human history, and it's only in Western culture in the last 100 or so years that we've had to rediscover these substances. And that's because of the heritage and the lineage of what's gone before, where Western culture basically tried to sever the connection with the planet and to subjugate a lot of the indigenous peoples that it came across in the colonization of the empire and the church, and especially those cultures which had psychoactive plants, the work of the devil, you know. And so, you know, since the Industrial Revolution, we've really, the West has nurtured this empire of the mind, but it's been at the expense, practically at the empire of the soul, of this connection to spirit. And you know, in Indigenous sense, these medicines are used as part of the community and part of a sense of ritual, and they don't necessarily have a usage of recreation or recreational drug use that the West has demonized these things for. But I'm going to open this to the panel because it opens up so many interesting issues around, you know, communities that form around sacramental use or have a binding force in them. And we've also had now in the West a few generations at least of psychedelic and now entheogenic culture rolling out. So maybe I'll open this to panel to discuss their thoughts on that.
I think we have, we're starting to map it fairly well now. We're starting to map the experiences fairly well now with psychedelics. And we have, that I know 4 generations of people who use them. And it doesn't get easier. Each generation gets to go through its own period with this. But we now have a support system that wasn't there before. And this is one thing that I see about the Aya community, is that it does come together as a community. And they do rally around each other, and they do rally around healing. And this is something new with psychedelics in general. I mean, there's always been pocket communities, but the Aya community certainly seems to have an emphasis on holistic health and for the person as a whole.
Well, I would have to say that one important thing in the ayahuasca world is ayahuasca herself, because ayahuasca herself is an intelligence, and so people have asked me sometimes about how she compares with other psychedelics, and I would say, well, it's like how do different teachers compare. I mean, it's her personality, her character as an intelligent being is very pronounced. In fact, it's like, I met her the second time I drank ayahuasca. The first time it wasn't, not much happened. But I was out in the jungle, and she and I was a little overwhelmed by the plant energy there. I mean, I'm very sensitive to the plant energies, but it was just like a huge, like in a huge multitude of people with so many voices, you just can't distinguish them. And I felt overwhelmed by that. And then when I drank it, I saw this vision of, well, I should say beforehand, the Indians were always talking about Mother Ayahuasca, Mama Ayahuasca is called Kesh. Well, the mother of all plants, the mother of all medicines, and the mother of all intelligence, and the source of all knowledge. That's all sounds wonderful. But then when I met her, I said, oh my gosh, that's not a metaphor. She really is. She really is a being who and she said to me, welcome to my jungle. Everyone who takes me is part of my family. And I'm going to take you and introduce you to all the spirits in the jungle. And they all were like, and she took me out and like flying through the jungle, and all the jungle spirits were like, oh, well, any friend of Mama Aya is a friend of ours. But it was almost like that moment she said, everyone who takes me is part of my family. That was like a moment that I think changed me forever, because it was like I feel a bond with everyone who drinks ayahuasca, in any context. It's like even if I've never met them, I don't know who they are, and they're thousands of miles away, and I've never heard their names. It's like after spending 2 years in the jungle drinking ayahuasca, and so she just reinforced that sense in me every time, that everyone who takes me is part of my family, and that she's Mother Ayahuasca, and she cares about us. And it's not just taking a chemical, it's meeting a being who cares about you, who's with you and wants and cares about your welfare. So that when you drink ayahuasca, you're not alone, which you can feel, if you take some other psychedelic, you can sometimes feel alone and abandoned, but if you drink ayahuasca, you're not alone. She's a presence who's there to try. She might not understand everything about humans, but she at least cares about you. And so I think that's what binds the ayahuasca community to me, it's Mother Ayahuasca herself that just makes everybody who connects with her feel like family to me.
What was the question?
What do you think of psychedelic communities and entheogenic communities? You're talking about the Burning Man community that centers around the ritual of the Burning Man, but there's also a mind-altering sort of space to it. And what are these ties that bind and these sort of connections between the subcultures?
You had said in the film that when you go through this experience with people, and I mean, you are extremely vulnerable.
You are usually mostly naked and things are coming out of every orifice of your body and you're making very strange sounds and, you know, and then you talk about it the next day in great detail. So, you know, for people who aren't used to this and hear the graphic language he uses, it's actually something that's very common. So, you know, I think that when you go through poo-poo with people, you bond with them pretty heavily. But also, for me, in particular, it's the bonding that comes when people are seeking healing, specifically. I draw lines of demarcation between, you know, people who are seriously pursuing the healing and people who are tourists, and they just want to get high, and they're just curious about the trip and stuff like that. And that stuff drives me crazy. Because, you know, there's a genuine seeking of, you know, the relief of pain, the transcendence of the trauma and the shadow and all of the things that hold us back and that we sought out the medicine for in the first place. I have eternal bonds with the people that I've done that work with, but there are a few within this whole kind of like, you know, I don't know, how many people in this room have ever drank ayahuasca in Los Angeles? Okay. Did you happen to be in a big scene stir drink session like I did? It was the worst experience of my life. There was 35 LA scene stirs in one tiny room made for maybe 12 with a guy who did not know how to do what he was doing. Anyone ever had a spiritual mugging on ayahuasca? You know what that is? Yeah. It's when somebody else's entity, shit, demon, whatever the hell you want to call it, jumps into you. Yeah, and that's when the shaman can't hold the space properly. And usually that's when they have this thing called gringoism. But that's something else we can bring up because I happen to be one of those people that has very strong feelings about gringos getting involved in the shaman work. And I could go on about that if you want me to. But, okay, sure.
We're all gringos. We're involved in the shaman work.
So we were in Australia, Rack and I were in Australia with Darpan and Dennis McKenna. This was in November of 2012. We're at this entheogenic conference called Entheogenic. And so they had a panel called Gringo Shamanism. And I was wondering, do they mean that ironically? Like, is this a comedy panel? But it wasn't. They were actually genuine. See, I guess it wasn't ironic. In the States, we kind of immediately thinking they were being cheeky, right? But they were actually seriously talking about it. And so, you know, in listening to the panel, you come to understand that there are people like the gentleman in the film who have, you know, literally committed to a lineage, gone down, they were called by the plant. I'm not talking about those guys. I'm talking about every kind of chakra slinging, bullshit peddling, shaman wannabe, who's really just looking to score with women, white guy, who uses the medicine to manipulate people. And that's an epidemic in a lot of the West Coast, and particularly down in California. And so there's a lot of people that are playing with this medicine for power, and they have no idea what they're doing with it, and they have no idea the damage they're doing with it. And it's gotten so popular that the communities in a lot of places aren't enforcing this, they're facilitating it. And so it's more tourism, and you're playing around in the spirit realm, and you shouldn't be fucking around in there if you don't know what you're doing. That's just how I feel about it. Like I said, I have strong feelings. Thank you.
This segues very well to something that I'd like to say as someone's been one of the main moderators in the ayahuasca forums for the last 12 years. And there's basically 3 groups of people. We don't get those kinds of people like he's talking about in the ayahuasca forums. But there's about 3 types of drinkers. There's people who go to South America, mainly to the tourist centers or the retreats, to try to drink in a quasi-traditional setting, which isn't really traditional, but it sort of is. And there's independent drinkers who brew ayahuasca at home and drink it on their own themselves. And there's people in the ayahuasca churches, like the Santo Daime. So those are like 3 distinct communities. We try to keep the balance. Now, this segues into what I'd like to put the second group, which is people who brew and drink ayahuasca themselves. at home is that people can and do make their own ayahuasca and drink their own ayahuasca, but it's very, very inadvisable to drink ayahuasca with another person who is inexperienced. If you have never had any ayahuasca experience, do it by yourself or with a sitter if you need it, but don't drink with another inexperienced person, because just what Charles said, people's demons jump each other. It was mentioned in the film about how you're in the field with somebody else. When people, several people, even two people get into some kind of vortex with each other, you can just pull each other down like two drowning men trying to climb on the other one as a life preserver. It's very strongly inadvisable not to drink with other inexperienced people. If you and your friends want to do it, you should each take turns. It can be done. You can do it yourself if you're prepared. I mean, you need to do serious preparation if you want to drink ayahuasca on your own. You need to learn about it and do a lot of serious preparation. But don't drink it together with another inexperienced person, because that is, or with crazy people like Charles was just talking about, who I don't know them, but it sounds pretty bad, because I could definitely see the potential for that kind of thing. So that's just something that I was planning to mention.
Well, it's very true. It's very interesting, and you know, number one, there's this integration, or there's this clash of cultures where the West is relearning that this dimension exists. You know, that this dimension is possible to access, and there is healing in it, and there's a lot of culture clash between the money that Westerners bring down to the South American scene and the lodge system, and there's inbuilt politics all around it. And there's a generation now, I think, where we're going through these teething issues, which can be very dynamic and very, you know, unsettling. And there's issues around power dynamics and money and inappropriateness of the shamans themselves, the curanderos, around Westerners, especially women. And this energy as well is sort of replicated in the West, as we were saying, with Westerners practicing on their own. For me, the deeper issue as well, though, is that it's like we're all babies. We're learning how to crawl in these spaces, in these realms. In Peru and through South America, it's been practiced for hundreds, if not thousands of years, and there's also a cultural acceptance. It's legal to start with. And you know, if you grow up in the indigenous jungle setting, there's also mestizo shamanism and shamanism in the cities as well now. But there's still an understanding that they're in the jungle, they're in the web, they're in the mother herself, and this is one plant amongst many, and there's an acceptance of the curandero as the healer and of these spaces that it reveals. And the cultural acceptance means so much. Like, it's from that starting point, people can learn. And so the curanderos take, you know, decades to learn their art. There's the hereditary route, or the initiatory sickness, or something which means they're drawn through the sensitivity of their soul, or their vibration is drawn to be a receptacle for the spirits, and to be sensitive to the spirits, to be a healer on behalf of the tribe. So a lot of these people in the West who are stepping up into these bridging gaps, I hope and I feel that many of them have good intent. Like, I know a lot of medicine people, Western medicine people, and they're all young. Like, not many have been doing it for more than a decade. And so there's a lot of growth issues around that. And there's also now the second generation sort of people who might have a calling, or they might have an inkling, but it might not be from the deeper calling, or the heart space. And again, there's money and power, and there's the scene in it. And so Charles is very right, and Gayle's been right as well. And hopefully, though, the culture is self-regulating to some degree. That you were voicing concerns that perhaps it's not, as it snowballs and becomes a fad and becomes popular. And ayahuasca is really hitting the mainstream press. About a month ago, it was in Elle magazine, like the women's magazine. And there's a picture of a woman, like, with a yellow aura in a cityscape, and it's called Walking on Sunshine. And it was a really positive article. It was actually quite well written and researched, and you know, it had the goods. But that was communicated to the audience of Elle magazine as like not a dietary fad, but a new spiritual well-being modality. And so, you know, it's communicating to that audience, and it creates a demand for that product. And this is what the West does. It takes holy sacraments from different contexts, and it turns them into commodities. So there's a big danger in this. But I still believe also, as Gayle said, ayahuasca is an entity, and it's our ally, and she's working through these modalities. She doesn't care if she has to work through capitalism or socialism or Elle magazine or whatever, because she's connecting to people, and she wants to reach out to embrace the world. But you know, those people have the issues and have the politics and have these issues around it. And it's the start of a shamanic generation. So I hope that people who stay in the culture will start to, you know, share and feedback and self-regulate, because if they don't, then that regulation is going to come from outside, and that's the real danger as well.
The thing that concerns me is that with the proliferation of this, and with, you know, the Chambray Center, for example, where, you know, millions were poured into creating a destination center, it turned out that there was some iffy stuff going on there, and then what was brought back out of that, bear with me for a bit, but there was a shaman named Manculoto who was attached to this center in Peru. He turned out not really to be a shaman, he turned out to be more of a dark sorcerer. There is a difference. The way that you work with this medicine can have positive or negative effects. The way that you relate to the medicine can have positive or negative effects. When a sorcerer works with it, it tends to bring out the worst of the stuff. So a lot of prominent people went and drank with this guy and then came back and, for lack of a better term, became insufferable narcissistic shitheads. And they became completely full of themselves and their own message. Now, I bring this up not to be, you know, pointing fingers, but to say that this is one of the pitfalls of working with psychedelics, is that if you aren't balanced in your hemispherical shit going on up here, and you're not looking at both sides of the equation, you're not reflecting on your shadow, what you're doing is you're allowing this voice that wants to inflate your ego, which is more of a trickster or something like that, to come out. And insecure people and narcissistic people, they take the medicine and they hear a voice that tells them, that says that they're basically quasi-messianic, that they're here to save us all. And that is a very dangerous voice. Now, when I was drinking this stuff, there were times when I literally felt as if I was now the shaman, and I knew I could actually say the curandero. I understood it. But that was only when I was in the trance. And in the trance, man, it showed me a lot of visions, grandiose visions, you know, of me, some kind of prophetic savior. But I listened over time, and I realized that a lot of people have this story. And then I realized, oh wow, she plays tricks on us. Oh shit. But without a learned, wise, experienced shaman that knows how to tell you, no, you're not special. She tells everybody that. She's your mother. Your mother loves you. Everyone's child is special to their mother, right? But nobody gets that. They all think, oh, I am Paul Atreides. I am here. Yeah. I am here to bring order to the universe. I am the Muad'Dib. And I mean, people think this shit. I'm not making this up either for entertainment's sake. Okay?
It's true.
He's right.
So, with the lack of standards and practices, without the legacy and the wisdom of generations, and this multi-generational conversation going on with the elders to the younger people, we're just kids again, going off into their own thing. And when children are left unsupervised, they get into trouble. I know, man, but it's the only way I can deal with it at this point, is to make the humor about it.
You know, he's totally right. And of course, these things he's talking about don't originate with ayahuasca. They're just magnified by it, or enabled, or facilitated. And this is actually very old with ayahuasca. I mean, ayahuasca in the Amazon, in the indigenous cultures in the Amazon, brujeria, you know, sorcery is like, it was. I don't talk about this a lot, but it's publicly. But since, you know, I think maybe it's something that needs to be talked about.
Rock on, sister.
It's like a constant presence. There's constant paranoia. I don't know how many brujos there are, but it's like everybody is like, oh, you know, afraid that there's brujos and that people are using ayahuasca to put curses on each other. And this is part of the ancient indigenous use of ayahuasca. Is this used to, pasangas or love potions is one of the things that people, or just making people sick. And so I used to, one time I asked her, you know, you could, when I was drinking ayahuasca, you could ask her things. I said, well, why do you let people do this? Why do you let people use you for sorcery and bad things? And she says, well, that's between. What's between humans is not my business. humans, and I mean, I'm like an ambassador from another country. It doesn't get involved in your internal affairs. When humans want to curse each other, stuff that doesn't matter to me. All I am is a plant. I'm here as an ambassador from the plant world to try to get people back in touch with the plant world and to communicate with the plant world. In the jungle, she's a mediator between the plant world and the human world. And one thing that I realized is that brujos or curanderos or whatever they were all like completely attuned to the natural world. They're all like ferocious defenders of the Amazon rainforest. And in fact, people who drink ayahuasca, probably all these screwed up people that Charles is talking about, once they drink ayahuasca a few times, suddenly they start becoming passionate defenders of the Amazon rainforest, even if they've never cared about it before. It's just like, that's the price that she pays. She says, I'll do what you want, and in return, you guys you're gonna be on my side to save my forest. And people actually drink in the forest. People, anthropologists who don't know what, innocently drink, and suddenly they're devoting their lives to saving the rainforest. And she doesn't. That's her agenda, and she doesn't really care what humans do with each other because that's not. She's a plant, and that's not her business. So she'll if you want to misuse it as a human to human thing, and to seduce people, to become some kind of crazed messiah, whatever you want to do. She doesn't care. That's not her business. She's like a foreign ambassador who doesn't get involved in human things. She only gets involved in plant things. And if you ask her for healing, she will help you. She will. You have to ask her. You have to bring your intent. She does not heal you automatically. You have to come and say, please heal me. And she, oh, okay, yeah, I'll do that. She doesn't force anything on you. So, yeah, ayahuasca can definitely be misused, and it can be misused by for people for egotistical reasons, and that goes way back into the indigenous world. I remember thinking, and I brought this up to some of my friends. I said, do you think the reason that there's so many brujos around is that ayahuasca gives them access to these realms that people who are not really, don't really deserve it, that they can get access to those realms? And it's like, this question had never even, it was like but everybody I asked that to actually thought about it, they said, yeah, that's it. People who shouldn't have access to those realms do get access to those realms, and they can misuse it. They never really thought of it in those questions, in that terms before, but everybody, after they thought about it, said, yeah, that's true. So ayahuasca you have to bring your own maturity to ayahuasca. She's not going to make you a mature person. She'll help you the best she can, but she's not going to turn you into a mature person if you're not already. So you have to be grounded and stable when you approach ayahuasca in the first place. And that's why ayahuasca takes a lot of preparation, self-preparation. It's not something to rush into. You have to really prepare yourself and be grounded to approach ayahuasca.
Very good points, and it often does get swept under the carpet in the glamorization and the mythology developing around ayahuasca, as it essentially is sort of becoming a quasi sort of global religion. And to be fair as well though, religion originally in Latin means to reconnect, and as Gayle said, it is doing that reconnection. It's reconnecting us to the healing within and to the web of life and to the plant kingdom, and that seems to be its agenda. Now, talking about these sort of messianic overtones and using ayahuasca as a tool, it's a vegetal tool to connect us to greater dimensionality. And there's been other tools in the West, whether that's derived from plant materials or the lab. And one of the predominant ones, let's look at the psychedelic revolution. Acid at that time, as it swept over the Western culture and sort of really changed the consciousness of millions of people, it became a political force, became a threat to the establishment. But there was also, again, this same romanticization of acid can change the world. Now ayahuasca can change the world, or ecstasy is going to change the world. It's almost like every generation they say you get the politicians you deserve. I think you also get the sacrament you deserve, whether that's from the lab or the earth. But it's how the humans use it. You can use a hammer to kill or to make something. You can use these consciousness expanding tools to expand your consciousness and to do something positive. But when you come back down, it's all about the integration. And remember, in the jungle setting and scenario, yes, the brujos use it. Some of the curanderos said to me, it's not that ayahuasca is necessarily good or bad. Like like us, it contains both good and bad, both light and dark in its own shadow. Many of the plants of the jungle can be used. They make toxins or poison, some of the trees, or they can make healing things from. The vegetal kingdom doesn't discriminate like we do in that sense. But these are tools, and so it's up to us to use them wisely. And hopefully there is the elder guidance there. But I mean, just like in the '60s, these things can go off the rails. It's like they're very potent tools, and they explode consciousness. But it's like, what do we do with them? We need to have the maturity of how to use them wisely. So I'm hoping Gwilym will be able to tell us how to do that.
Okay, I've been at this a long time, and ayahuasca will give you what you bring to it. Okay, it's a relationship. All psychedelics are that way, especially some of you. Let's see, hands for. Has anybody done mushrooms? Ooh, that's good. Peyote. Okay. San Pedro. Okay. 5-MeO. Okay. Yep. Okay. DMT from the lab. Okay. Okay. So I could go through a series of things. I'm not going to go into a lot of the chemicals but all of these are great tools. And one of the things that we have to figure out with them is how generationally do we blaze away. And I have a son who's very intelligent, and he's just basically said to me after sitting for hours and hours with groups of people, listen to this, like, I'll have a drink, Dad. And it's, it's like my wife and I have tripped together for 36 years, and we have a son that's like the straightest arrow that you could ever see. But he's highly creative, does his writings. So if he engages with it, fine. And the biggest thing is that when you start out, and if you're young, it's good to talk to somebody who's a bit older, who's been there, because you need community. And what stuff you bring back, you have to learn how to integrate. And this is you don't have to have a teacher. We're all equals. Everybody comes with the exact plans inside. And ayahuasca, for me, was like an amazing tool. I felt her inside of me for a month afterwards, first time I did it, working away. And any psychedelic can do that. They all have their distinct signatures, as we know. Mushrooms tell you stories, I'll give you, for instance, I first encountered ayahuasca in 1967. Now, I said I encountered it, okay? I had a place in Colorado that was a way station between the East Coast and the West Coast. And I had some people from Millbrook, which was Larry's place, and Ralph Messner's, come to stay with me for a day or so on their way to San Francisco. And I played the host and everything. And at that point, LSD was legal. Sounds like a wonderful time period. DMT, the only thing that was illegal was marijuana, okay? So as they're leaving, one of the gentlemen hands me 2 capsules. And inside of it is this red crystals. And he says, what's this? He says, this is yahi. And I'm scratching my head, and I find the book on it. And at that point, I'm traveling back and forth to California quite a bit. And I have this big bowl of mescaline, about 100 hits. And I'm out to give it away to all my friends everywhere. So I go to this place in California, I pull out this bottle, and I toss it to my friends in this commune. It says, have as much as you like, except for those 2 capsules. And so I take off, come back the next day, and a friend comes up to me and says, I want to apologize. I took those 2 capsules before you said that. And then I took the mescaline on top of it. And so what turns out is that it wasn't ayahuasca in there, it was keapi, crystallized keapi. And the experience he was a nice Jewish kid from the Fairfax district in LA. He said, first thing I knew, I was a fish in a stream in the jungle. The next thing I knew, I was a tapir following alongside the fish. And then I was a jaguar following after and then I was an anaconda. He says, and at that point, I flew up into the sky, I became an eagle, and I passed out. He says, what the hell did you give me? And here's the guy that didn't have any clue about any of this stuff, who had the experience that we hear about, okay? He had no priming for it, and he launched into it. So these are powerful tools. She has that much of a signature that she could reach all the way to LA at that time period. So play carefully. That's the one thing I say.
Yeah, the last point I wanted to make about this is that, unfortunately, even though ayahuasca has come to the Western world, we are taking a very Western attitude towards it. And Western attitude towards medicine is that you take a medicine every day and you take it forever. And that's what a big trend I see happening is this constant retreat to the medicine whenever I need clarity, I need a break, I need some healing, I need this, I need that, and everybody goes to the medicine. And they just keep going back and back. My understanding of it is like Alan Watts said, when you get the message, you hang up the phone. When you get your healing, you move on. And I think that it's a tool to help us heal. It is not meant to turn into a crutch. Very few people actually take this thing regularly and all the time. It usually tends to be the shamans. Even the people in the tribes don't take it all the time. They take it on special occasions. In Africa, with the Gabon, with the Abwidi and Gabon, when they have their initiation with the boga, they take it once. I mean, they take enough to kill an elephant, but they take it once. And that's their initiation, and they go in there, they meet their ancestors say, here's your problem, here's your core weakness. You can fix it or you can't fix it, it's up to you. And then they send them off into their life. The initiatory ritual is what we're missing.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, that was the hard lesson for people in the 60s. I was quite young. I was 14 when I first did LSD. And it took me years to get the language to describe the experiences that I had. It put me in a great point of despair most of the time. But it was a healing. But it's what you bring to it. And it's, you have to have preparation, okay? It's nothing to be done casually, okay? I've heard about people drinking ayahuasca and going to raves. It was about 2 years ago. I heard a report on this, and I'm like, are you serious? What if you chunder right in the middle of the dance floor, for God's sake? But all these tools are great, but, I hardly ever use them anymore. It's because I sit down and I do art, and it just comes out at this point. But there's times when I do come back. I have been away from psychedelics for as long as 9 years at a time. Okay? There's a thing called kids. So anyway, they're great tools, but use them sparingly and use them wisely.
Yeah, I want to make a point. One of the differences between ayahuasca and a lot of other psychedelics, something that rock film didn't even mention, is that in no way is it pleasant or fun. It doesn't make. There's nothing euphoric. It's not. There's nothing euphoric about it. It's not like if you take LSD or mushrooms or something like that. That gets you high and makes you euphoric, even if nothing else happens. There's nothing intrinsically euphoric about ayahuasca. It's actually kind of pretty miserable, and you have to be sort of masochistic to do it. And I think that's one of the things that's going to keep it from becoming a drug abuse of some sort, because it's not actually fun. And when you watch a movie like this, you can see a lot of wonderful visuals, and I thought the visuals really captured the feeling of high DMT ayahuasca. But the Indians have a very different point of view of ayahuasca from like the McKennas and people like that. Because to them, ayahuasca is the vine, and the DMT plants are just the helpers, and they're just optional. And you can have all those revelations and all those experiences without any of those visuals. In fact, when I first started drinking ayahuasca, I didn't know anything about it. I first got into the jungle to, I mean, I read about it in anthropology books, but not really much about it. And went to the jungle because I was working with the Indians on fighting the oil companies. Were trying to, were invading their Ecuadorian jungle, and they introduced me to it. And I had been drinking it for about a year before I went online and started to learn about it. So I didn't have any preconceptions about it, but one thing that I discovered on my own, independently from my own experience, was that there was no correlation between how visual the journey was and how deep it was. Sometimes they were both deep and visual. Sometimes they were deep and not visual at all. Sometimes they're visual but not deep at all. And sometimes they were neither. And they were, and I thought that was just interesting observation of my own experience. And after I'd been drinking ayahuasca for a year, I went online and started learning about it and found out about this MAOI-DMT synergy. Because for the Indians it was all about the vine. And you know, they threw in some other leaves, you know, they would pack as much vine as they could into the pot, and then more, and jam it up, and then, you know, toss a few leaves in as the helpers. And what they said, when I started asking them about it, this is what they said was that the vine, you know, one of the things that I would hear from the Naparoni Indians that I lived with was the vine is like the cave, and the helper plants, the DMT plants, are like a torch you use to see inside the cave. And they considered it to be a sort of a sign of a beginner to need a lot of light. And the better you got at it, the less light you needed, because the more you could just sense what was inside the cave. You didn't really need a really bright flashlight to light it all up. You knew you knew the territory down there, and you could have very profound revelations and very profound healings without any of these visuals at all. And you know, because sometimes the DMT plants would be subthreshold, or sometimes if they didn't have any DMT plants, that didn't matter. They were just just plain Cappy vine, and that's ayahuasca to them, because there's a reason why ayahuasca is named after the vine, and not the ayahuasca vine, and the brew is named after the vine, and that's consistent in almost every Indian language. It's where names for ayahuasca, or no, not just in Quechua. And so you watch a movie like this and it makes it seem like it's all about those visuals, which are like way cool. But you know, you can see those. You can go to a movie like this and see those visuals, and that'll save you the trouble of. That's not actually what the ayahuasca experience is about. It's a deep, energetic, powerful spiritual work that goes on inside that can happen independently of all those pretty visuals. But I must say that those visuals, there's some points that they really did capture what high DMT ayahuasca looks like. There was, good job of capturing that. So anyway.
I totally concur, Gayle. The first few journeys I had on ayahuasca, drank once in Australia and the first few in Peru, I had no visions either. And quite often, actually, when I do drink, I don't have a visionary state anymore, in some senses. But some of the curanderos I interviewed when I first went down there, they said that a lot of people from the West are going down in search of a physical ailment that they want to cure, or an emotional thing, or a connection to a loved one who's passed on, or they've got a specific problem and something that's very identifiable, and because they're healers, like, oh yeah, we understand that. But when this wave of Western seekers started to come down, this deluge of people, and they didn't have any physical ailments or something they could pinpoint, and they wanted visions, they were chasing the visions, and there was the famous National Geographic article in 2006, and it was called, the vision seekers, and it's like, it's something in the hypermediation of Western culture and this visualization and this enchantment with the visionary state. The Westerners are chasing the visions. And so what happened, because there was a demand from the customers for visions, a lot of the curanderos started loading up the brew with high DMT, the chacruna or chalaponga leaves. And some of the lodges I've been at as well, I'll hear the lodge owners say that they were just totally, we gave those customers what they wanted, which is the visions. And in the, even in the film, in the 5-MeO DMT sequence, it's like we had to take some shortcuts visually because it's basically a white light tunnel experience, but it's the ultimate vision, and there's no vision at all, you know? And for me, going into these spaces, what it opens is my empathic ability to feel, and I open up and, you know, we're talking about being around other Westerners and rolling around, you can feel everyone. Everyone has the slightest little cough or the little sounds, and along the carrier wave of that sound, I can feel them, and so I open up so much that it's like my whole soul becomes a satellite dish to receive signal, you know? And it's like, so on that level it's opening up. On the deeper spiritual levels, I usually get like this intense, heavy vibrational attunement to entities and things coming in, and I don't really have a high visionary, you know, element. But the film does, you know, try to represent the visions, and you're right in that there's something in this commodification and integration of the shamanic visionary, I'll call it the visionary experience, but it's not visionary, it's energetic. It's an energetic experience. And so even this cultural transmission of ayahuasca as it comes into the West is being changed, you know? So there's a danger there in chasing the visions. And the curanderos and other people say, it's like, don't get distracted by the visions. The visions, someone gave me the analogy, it's like the visions are almost, if you're in a waiting room and they put the TV on for you, you know? It's like you just sit back there and you watch that stuff while we do the real work. And if you do then tune into what's happening energetically, there's the incredible depth, the profundity of that depth of connection, which is what it's really about. And it's an interesting, you know, cultural, you know, crossroads we're at with that.
Well, you remember in like Storming Heaven, I think is where I remember from specifically. The first reports they had on Yai coming back from like Burroughs and Ginsberg. Right. They're like, oh, this stuff's terrible, it's a nightmare. They hated it, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. Then they have then Leary and those guys get some DMT. Oh, this stuff's way too hairy, we hate this stuff, blah, blah, blah. They set it aside. Goes a little bit longer, then McKenna picks it up. So McKenna's the first person really exploring it. Then people start to get into it. And our generation, Gen Xers, we start to pick it up based on McKenna. Now these millennials, you know, we kind of experiment with DMT a lot, didn't really kind of send us down the same horrid path that it did the older generation. Now the millennials younger than us, they're smoking it standing up at a Spangle show. And that shows me we evolve. You know, our brains evolve. We have these substances, they unlock something, we pass them into our children, and our children were born with a greater capacity. And their children are born with an even greater capacity, but ultimately, it's just unlocking our potential. That's not the actual potential. Right?
One of the things about ayahuasca too is that it speaks emotively. That's one of the languages that I got from it. And that's where, for me, was healing, was the emotions. You know, it let me examine things, and as I'd gone through like a health crisis, and I could feel it working its way through me, checking me out, you know? And you feel it. I mean, people talk about seeing snakes and stuff like that, anacondas. I'd never have seen that, but I certainly felt it in me, okay? And it was checking me out, and it was tapping me up through, I'd say the chakras, for a short word for it, but it was checking in on all these different nerve groups. And it was that experience in itself, you know, it was like it was trying to reassure me, it's okay, it's okay. And that in itself, it has a certain signature that, as Gayle said, it's unique in that respect.
We've got about 10 more minutes. Is there any questions from the audience?
I would like to say something. Earlier we were talking about how to do this safely and some of the pitfalls of the popularity of it. So I just wanted to take this opportunity to maybe as a community suggest some things or maybe make some commitments with each other about if you're organizing a ceremony, requesting information from the person who's facilitating, like where did they study, who did they study with, how long have they studied, how long have they been facilitating. And if you're attending a ceremony, also feel comfortable and free to ask that information of the person who's organizing. And let's just get that going as a regular practice to be holding facilitators accountable and also be, you know, taking this amazing, intense gift and opportunity really seriously by just sort of raising the bar on what we expect. I also work with one woman who, if someone hasn't sat with her before, she has to have a phone conversation or a face-to-face with them before they sit. And she also asks for everyone's information about pills that they're taking, and she runs them by a doctor first. And I also think that's something that we can start to begin to expect is that level of care and responsibility about doing this. I think since it's kind of hidden in some ways, we can feel so excited just to have the opportunity to sit with someone that maybe that just feeling of opportunity can override some of our desire to question, to keep ourselves safe. But we can ask those questions, and we can create culture, because we don't have a culture right now, and this is coming in here. So let's just help each other out to do that. Thanks.
True that.
On that note, there's a new NGO called the Ethno-Botanical Stewardship Council, which Joshua Wickerham and others are running, and they're bringing in ideas like sustainability and duty of care. And there's been other practitioners. Bia Labate is one of the academics who's done a lot of work bringing together these issues. And communities of ayahuasca practitioners around the globe are facing all these same problems. As our culture grows, it takes root around the world, and there's no point in reinventing the wheel. So a lot of the academics and a lot of these sort of streams are pulling together the reports and the the information from these communities and doing things like creating a duty of care checklist or things that can be set in stone and need to be then disseminated through the communities, so not just the people that think up the idea, but other people can run with it and establish these foundations for safe usage of the plants and of the practice. So it is really important, yeah.
I wanted to say in connection with this is that if people want to ask more questions in depth, they could go to our ayahuasca forums, but the ayahuasca, one of the problems with people, among people who drink ayahuasca, whether they go to Peru or do it independently, is the integration process, is not having a support system for integration. A lot of people, fly off to Peru for a couple of weeks, and they come back and they don't have any support for integrating these experiences, and solitary drinkers even less. So the ayahuasca forums, that's an important function that we perform, is to allow people to communicate with each other and help support their integration process of these experiences, and also to help with preparation beforehand, so that people don't rush into it unprepared. So I'd like to just invite anyone who goes online to just www.ayahuasca.com, forums.ayahuasca.com if they're interested, because we can provide a lot of information and support for people who are going through integration processes.
Maybe one more point.
I'm interested in, among those of you who are intimately the distinction between, drinking ayahuasca. There are purists who in the holistic community, there's kind of an anti-white powder sentiment. And my first ceremony, I was disallowed from drinking because of some medication that I'd taken that was determined was really going to work. So they gave me what they call Jaguar, which turned out to be 5-MeO. And it was quite profound. And I just am interested in anybody who wants to speak to that distinction. It's white powder, it's made in the lab, but it's
I can do it. I got something to say about that.
Well, since I got the mic first, I'll say something about it. Just not just speaking about white powders, but about plants and so on. Ayahuasca vine in the jungle is she's a translator and mediator between humans and plants, and it doesn't just mean she teaches humans how to understand plants. It means she teaches plants and probably chemicals too how to understand humans. And one time I had this vision where she was, because taking DMT by itself is very different from ayahuasca, even a high DMT ayahuasca. And I had this vision in which she was teaching these DMT plants how to handle humans, much as you would teach a 4-year-old how to handle a kitten. Now, this human is not a toy. Be nice to your human. Don't be rough with it. Now, pet it nice. That's right. Because she teaches these plants how to. And I'm sure she does the same things with chemicals too. So anyway, that's just what I want to say.
that distinction reminds me of somebody saying, you know, capillaries are okay, but arteries are not. I mean, they both circulate blood, powders, plants. It's all about the end result, not the medium. And I think people that draw distinctions are just being wankers because they want to feel superior. There's a lot of judgment in this so-called non-judgmental, so-called open healing community. In fact, I've seen more judgment, more arrogance, and more ego in this so-called selfless, open, non-judgmental healing community than I've seen in Capitol Hill. Okay. And I'm not exaggerating. I mean, people can be really vicious when they put on the mantle of the healer. Somebody said this the other day on my Facebook page. They said the wounded healer is the one who wounds the most. Yeah. That's all I got to say about that.
I really like DMT. If you have ever had, I don't know, it's a classic. I mean, it's like, for me, it is a great healer, but the void that it introduces you to, okay? Where you get to look across that infinite space. I would recommend it everybody at least once. You don't have to do it after that, believe me. But it left me weepy for a few days because it was beautiful and it was frightening. And that's all I have to say about it.
You know, John Lilly was a scientist and a psychedelic researcher in the 60s and 70s, and he worked with ketamine predominantly, which is a white powder. And, you know, he said that the feeling was, you know, the emotional sort of feeling, the resonance of it was like an empty room, you know, there's no furniture and there's no spirit in it. And when people sort of make these distinctions between the man-made lab chemicals and the plant entheogens, there's truth in it to a level, but ultimately, you know, it's a whole system, and the lab has been made by people who've been made by the planet. You know, it's all nature. It's all nature, but again, it's the human ego which has got this conceit that we're separate from nature, so we can't see that everything is embedded within nature and everything is natural chemicals. But the interesting, I guess, spiritual sort of thing, or the spiritual frowning that there is on these man-made chemicals is they say that perhaps the most recent chemicals, like all the Shulgin's, you know, children, they don't have this morphic resonance that the entheogens we've had a time-honoured tradition with, and they've built up a relationship with the humans. And I guess it's like what Gayle was saying, you know, it's like these new chemicals, they mightn't necessarily be bad. Again, it's how you use these things. All these substances can be sacred if you're using with that intent. If not, it's just recreation. But as we develop relationships with these substances as tools to open these pathways, I suspect that they will develop their own spirit, and the spirits will develop these relationships with us. So give it a few more generations, and all these substances may have the devas or the spirits in them which can connect and can be as holy and as sacred and as intimate as the plant entheogens. So yeah, look, it's an interesting topic, and we could go so much deeper with all of these issues, but we are going to have to wind things up. Thank you so much for coming tonight, and I hope that you enjoyed the film and the panel discussion. Thanks to Charles Shaw, Gayle Hifi, and Willy Lloyd. And if you like what you saw, it's available at iraawakenings.com. Please tell the others, and I encourage you to read the book, Ira: A Shamanic Odyssey, which the film is based on, which has a lot deeper journey and information embedded in there. And that's available at the website as well. Well, if anyone here knows anyone in Vancouver, it is playing on Sunday night at the Rio Theatre in Vancouver, and you can find the event details on iraawakenings.com. So, journey well. I wish you well on your journey, and thanks for overlapping on our journey, and many blessings to you. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.